23, right? So that means we've been here for 20 years. And that kind of caught me off guard a little bit, because it seems like it's been a blink of an eye since we moved here to Elwood City. But it got me thinking about all of our experiences that we've had since we moved here, and some of the great people we've met. And I started thinking about some of the pastors we've had: Dave and Nancy Wilson, Pastor Candace Tracy, Dr. Erlesser, Pastor Angelique, Pastor Pat, right? And that got me thinking about pastors that I've had in churches before we moved here. Because before we moved to Elwood City, we moved around a lot. We had different experiences at different churches. And one of my favorite pastors was in Parkersburg, West Virginia. And he used to do really cool children's sermons, where kids would bring something of their own, maybe their favorite stuffed animal. Or I remember one time a boy brought baseball, because he really loved baseball. And on the spot, the pastor would give a children's sermon based on whatever the kids brought that week. And I was amazed. I used to sit back in the back, and me and Joanne would be trying to guess, what's he going to do with this, right? How's he going to tie this to a message about God? And so I loved it. I was more interested in the children's sermons than I think the kids were sometimes. But what it taught me was that you can see God and you can find God in everything, right? Everything around us, there's some connection. So today what I want to do, Virginia, if you'll help me, is share one of my favorite games, because I really like games. And as Miss Beth said, here in a week or so, we're going to have a family game night. Hope everybody can come out and play some games and have some fun, right? So I want to share a game with you called Telestrations. Has anybody ever played this game? Well, I know this Miss. So this is a game, we don't even keep score when we play this game, because it's just kind of silly fun. And the idea behind the game is kind of like Pictionary. You get a word and you have to draw it. And then you pass it to the next person, and they flip the page back, they look at what you drew, and they have to guess what it was. Then they pass it on, and the next person has to draw that word. And so it's sort of like the old game of telephone. By the time you get to the end, the picture that you end up with usually looks a lot different than the word that you started with. And it's usually really silly. And if you're a bad drawer, it's actually better because it's more fun. You know, there's funny things that pop up. So here's what I want you guys to do. And congregation can do it too. You can take out your bulletin and a little pencil or pen. I want you to draw the word ministry. What does ministry mean to you? On your bulletin or in your book, flip to an open page and draw a picture that makes you think of ministry, that word. So if you're playing Telestrations and you were given the word ministry, what would you draw? It's a hard one. A lot of the words aren't that hard in Telestrations. I'm giving you hard. Any volunteers want to share what they drew or what they're thinking of? Even congregation? What do you think of when you think of ministry? Church, okay. So I did a little work ahead of time. I drew some pictures yesterday, some different things that I think of when I think of ministry, right? And the first thing that comes to mind, this is my Pastor Jay up here. Little stick figure behind the podium, right? Giving a sermon. Obviously, that's something we think of when we think of ministry. But I also have a hammer here, because I thought of Steve Miller and the work that he does with the Carpenters Project. I put some soup, because I thought about the Ministerial Food Bank and how we donate food to the people who need it. I thought about Jerry and Sandy and put some music up there, okay? Even a tent and a campfire, because a lot of the lessons that I've learned over the last 20 years have been related to Boy Scouts and that ministry. So what occurred to me was ministry comes in all kinds of forms, right? We can see God in all these different ways. And that's a pretty cool thing. And it got me thinking. Pastor Jay gave a sermon back in August. I take notes back there, sometimes in my bulletin, sometimes I have a notebook. And he said he wanted to provoke people to think differently. That was part of the sermon, provoking people to think different. And I sat back there, and I thought about games. because anybody that knows me knows that's kind of what I'm into. And how could I use games to reach people? And then I got to thinking, well, that's kind of silly. Games are such a trivial thing, right? It's kind of a goofy thing. And so I just sat on the idea for a while. And then Cindy came up and asked me about doing a family game night. And I thought, yeah, that's cool, we could do that. And the more I sat on it and thought about it, I thought, who are we to think that God couldn't reach people through games, right? In the Bible, we hear stories about shepherds, and we hear stories about tax collectors and farmers and different kinds of people. If he can use those tools to reach people, then why not games? So, I'm going to start, this is my first children's sermon, and each week, over the next couple months, I'm going to share a game with you guys. And we'll talk about how you play that game and the different lessons that you can learn for playing it. Does that sound like fun? Is anybody going to come out to game night? Yeah. Well, if you do, if you guys come out to game night, I would love to sit down and play a game with you. Okay? But over the next few weeks, I hope you'll come back to the children's service so I can share some games with you. Because I love games. All right? All right, let's say a prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for these children. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to see you and to learn your messages and your lessons that you have for us in so many different ways. Help us to keep our eyes open and our ears open so that we can listen and hear your words in everything we do.